Viewer discretion is advised. We will be talking about serial killers, and also there's going to be a lot of ugly pink crap on the screen. Welcome, weary YouTube traveler. You've stumbled into my Tales Crypt. Now that you're trapped here, welcome here. Yeah, why not make yourself comfortable? Grab a snack, grab a drink, and grab your whip because this is Tales from the Cr'Wip't. All right, you guys, I hope you're ready to dig in because today's might be a little lengthy. There's a lot to go over, but and I went down a rabbit hole. Oh boy. So, yeah, buckle up, buttercups, because this is a doozy. I'm gonna need you guys to put on your detective hats for a bit because this is a story that I couldn't even really decide for myself. Are we looking at a true crime situation? A serial killer situation? Or are we creating, like watching really, and contributing to the creation of an urban legend? I'll leave it up to you guys to decide after we talk about all of it. You ready? I bring you the Smiley Face Killer, or killers. Starting way back in 1997, at least 45, and some say that the count is well over 100 now in 2024. At least 45 young men have mysteriously disappeared after a night out drinking with friends, usually at bars, only to be found dead in a nearby body of water days or weeks later, and most are found with smiley face graffiti in the vicinity of where the body is found. Some believe that the smiley face killer, or killers, are to blame. So let's dive into this theory and determine for ourselves, is this true crime? Or is this an urban legend? Or maybe it's something else altogether. Now, I'm going to start you guys off at the beginning, and we're going to go into detail about Victim Zero, as they call him. And basically, it's the start of this whole thing, how this whole thing started. And then as we go through and listen, I want you to pay attention to all the details because you'll hear these details repeated over and over and over, but attributed to different young men's cases. So really kind of pay attention to the details because the details of this first case are pretty much cut and paste for every other alleged victim. So this whole decades-long tale began in 1997 with two men, Detective Kevin Gannon and Patrick McNeil Jr. In 1997, Kevin Gannon was a New York City police detective who got the call that a young man had gone missing. That young man was Patrick McNeil. Patrick, often referred to as Victim Zero, was a 21-year-old Caucasian male, student at Fordham University, who disappeared on February 16, 1997, after a night out with friends. What is agreed upon and substantiated by numerous witness accounts and video surveillance is that the 21-year-old was last observed on the evening of February 16, 1997, at an uptown Manhattan bar called the Dapper Dog, where he'd been drinking with some of his peers. Now, the Dapper Dog was like a small, narrow college dive, like a hole-in-the-wall type of place that the local university students would frequent on the weekends when school was in session. Favored for its frat-like atmosphere, loud music, and free-flowing booze, this popular pub also attracted its younger patrons with, quote, guest bartender night. They did this routinely, appointing like a popular student to bartend for the evening in hopes that that might persuade that bartender's circle of friends to stop by for a drink and loosen their wallets. Now, by this time in 97, when Patrick and his classmates had made the Dapper Dog their official watering hole, its owners had already racked up a considerable number of citations for their laissez-faire serving policies. Among the most notable violations, selling alcohol to minors and continuing to serve customers who were visibly and seriously intoxicated. So you get the idea what kind of place this was. But by most accounts, Patrick was a well liked student and famous for going out of his way to help people. And at the time, he was involved in at least half a dozen altruistic groups and related activities. A social organizer as well, he was also in charge of booking the entertainment acts for Fordham University. However, other accounts, well, they paint McNeil as not so well liked. He stood at about 6 feet tall and weighed in around 195 pounds. He's described as being well toned, and Patrick was, by all accounts, a good looking, clean cut, athletic guy. And even his closest friends admitted that Patrick was, no, he was a ladies' man, and that, quote, we'd tease him about his clothes, his cologne, how perfect he had to be. There were 7 roommates sharing the Fordham campus suite that Patrick lived in, and more than one of them had openly professed to disliking Patrick intensely. They criticized him to his face and behind his back for being a womanizer and complaining that he always was preening himself and that he cared too much for his personal appearance. And he was reportedly obsessed with his academic status because he had aspirations. He wanted to join the FBI after college, so he was very focused on his academics. In the early morning hours of February 16th, 1997, after being cited in the bar bathroom vomiting and claiming that he had suddenly felt really sick out of nowhere, he decided that it was time for him to go ahead and dip. He was leaving early. After having said his goodbyes and goodnights at the Dapper Dog, he announced that he was headed for the nearby subway station to return to the Bronx campus. Patrick McNeil was observed alone, lingering outside in front of the bar for quite some time. Allegedly, he was waiting there for a female friend who was supposed to still be inside using the ladies' room, but when she failed to meet him outside, after a while, he just kind of gave up and he proceeded to walk down the sidewalk alone, slowly navigating the 2 city blocks until eventually he turned the corner at 90th Street. It's worth noting that there are reports that while he was outside, kind of lingering and waiting around for his lady friend to finish using the facilities, there was a vehicle parked, I guess double parked, in front of the bar, not too far away from where Patrick was. And a lot of people thought it was really suspicious because when Patrick left, so did the car. It seemed to be following him. There are some conflicting accounts regarding the last time Patrick McNeil was ever seen alive. Some people said that he was only a little bit drunk, and some said he was a lot drunk. He was seen in the bathroom of the bar throwing up right before getting ready to leave, and Patrick was also observed by witnesses outside the bar in a highly unstable and disoriented state, reminiscent of, someone who was like on some kind of debilitating narcotic drug. Patrick was observed stumbling, falling against parked vehicles, and even vomiting again in the parking lot. Reports also state that Patrick's conduct as he made his way south on 2nd Avenue from the 92nd Street pub was apparently so worrying that a number of passerbys took notice of it. They claimed that they saw him staggering, stumbling, and even falling his way down the street. These eyewitnesses also described a vehicle containing a man and a woman, which appeared to have been following Patrick's movements from the minute he left the Dapper Dog. It's said that this vehicle was like slow creeping down the street, way under the speed limit, kind of keeping behind the staggering, stumbling Patrick. And when he would stop to, like if he fell or he stopped to kind of get his bearings or his balance, that the vehicle would stop too. And when he would start walking again, the vehicle would start creeping again. And that's what made people really notice the vehicle. Growing suspicious of the car driver's intent, one of the witnesses, having first seen the car double parked at the bar where McNeil was originally standing and starting from, even had the wherewithal to obtain a partial license plate number. Other onlookers also reported their belief that the occupants were tailing the young man, saying that the vehicle would come to a complete stop and then resume again each time McNeil would falter. When in this highly disoriented condition, he finally turned left onto 90th Street. Everyone who could see the vehicle at that juncture stated that it also took a left after him. And after that, neither the vehicle nor Patrick was ever seen again. Though the New York Police Department and thousands of volunteers searched for Patrick McNeil in the days and weeks following his mysterious disappearance, handing out and hanging up more than 10,000 flyers and posters from New York City all the way out to Yonkers. And in the process, they were making it one of the most famous missing persons cases in the city's entire history. Yet there was no sign and no leads as to where Patrick was or what had happened to him. Tensions would steadily rise between the McNeil family and their loved ones and the NYPD during the fruitless search. And it wasn't long before sources at the NYPD began leaking their own opinions about the case, about the victim's character, and his possible whereabouts. Most of these were quite negative. To give you an idea of just how unprofessional the police department became during this case, here are some of the baseless quotes they made. Quote, "Patrick made some mistakes," end quote, one detective cryptically alluded. Quote, "and it appears he needed some time and space to sort things out," end quote. Another NYPD cop said, quote, "the kid screwed up. He's probably hiding out in Queens," end quote. And yet another said, quote, "this kid is 21. He's a partier and he doesn't want to be in college," end quote. He was not even trying to hide his disdain for Patrick, and he claimed that he, quote, "knew that Patrick McNeil had impregnated at least a couple women," which there's never been evidence to support that he ever impregnated even one woman. And a final quote I found had another officer saying, "he's running around and involved in all this stuff so he doesn't have to be in school." Well, that sounds pretty contradictory to someone who's in college and doing very well in college and involved in multiple clubs and societies and the functioning of the college and has aspirations for the FBI. Yeah, that totally sounds plausible, Mr. Officer. Anyway, the dapper dog, finding itself in the crossfire and the subject of extreme public and legal scrutiny over their role in serving McNeil in the night in question, added to the conjecture by slandering Patrick's character, and they told journalists, quote, "he's shooting heroin on the west side," end quote, and, quote, "but because now he's 21, the cops can't bring him in," end quote. Patrick's family and friends reacted to all of these kind of slanderous seeming quotes in the media, and they got defensive, and they started speaking out, disputing all of these unflattering assessments. McNeil's father said, quote, "it's so out of character for my son. I know it was foul play," end quote. And a friend of his said, if he had problems, he'd confide in us, and nothing was bothering him that I know of. And this friend was known to McNeil since childhood and could be confident in that assertion. Even one of his Fordham roommates stated for the record, "I've never seen Pat in a bad mood. He's the last guy who'd run away from a problem." Well, things dragged on in this seemingly unproductive manner well into March of 1997, where the futile search and rescue efforts were further exasperated by a series of false sightings in other boroughs of New York. Finally, 50 days later, on April 7th, 1997, Patrick McNeil's body, clad only in his blue jeans and socks, was spotted face up in the East River near a Brooklyn pier, some 12 miles from his last known location. Further investigation revealed that Patrick's body should never have been recovered where it was, considering information obtained about the water currents for the East River, and the NYPD harbor unit that patrols that river daily said that there was no way the body could have been carried to where it was. Patrick had to have been abducted, driven to that location, and deposited there for him to have been recovered at that particular spot. On April 16, 1997, the New York City's chief medical examiner ruled that the death was an accidental drowning with a manner of death still unknown. Side note, what the hell does that mean? And it's an accidental drowning with manner of death still unknown? You just said it was an accidental drowning. Isn't that the manner? How can you unknow what you just knew? Confusion. But yes, on his death certificate, it states accidental drowning with the manner of death still unknown. Case closed. But was it really? Interestingly, in the autopsy report, the medical examiner states that the circumference around the neck, there was a pattern that consisted of like numerous vertical lines that were evenly spaced about 1/16 inches apart around his neck. And the pattern was like suggesting some kind of binding. Think like garrote or some kind of choking or asphyxiation method. It is worth noting that autopsy photos clearly show a ligature mark pattern around Patrick's neck as though he were bound in some way or held or injured by the neck in some way. There was apparently something around his neck at some point. Because of the suddenly questionable circumstances around McNeil's death and the condition of his corpse, the case was then tentatively upgraded as a potential abduction and murder, pending further investigation by police. As such, it was transferred from the Missing Persons Department and reassigned to the NYPD's much-decorated homicide detective, Kevin Gannon. Examining the remains and recovery photos, Detective Gannon had suspected from the body's lack of skin slippage that McNeil had not been in the water for the entire 2 months he'd been missing. Maybe, in fact, he'd only been floating around in the water for a few days tops before being discovered. Lividity wasn't adding up for him either. The telltale discolorations exhibiting on the front of the corpse clearly showed that McNeil had to have died lying face down for all of his blood to settle in the parts where it was settling, whereas his body had been discovered and recovered lying face up. Knowing from experience, too, that people who accidentally drown aren't usually found floating on their backs or with rope burns around their necks and other markings, the detective was very eager to formally name the yet unidentified owners and occupants of the vehicle that was seen following Patrick as persons of interest in the case. Further, the homicide detective Gannon also regarded the intoxicated angle with a great deal of skepticism. If a man Patrick's size had appeared that wasted on only 2 or 3 drinks, he believed that he must have been drugged to make it look that way. Probably a date non-consensual thing narcotic like Rohypnol or GHB. Judging from the reports of Patrick stumbling and fumbling while walking around down the street, those seemed very likely options. Because you see, the effects of these ether-like drugs can impair speech and muscle coordination. They can cause paralysis, blackouts, and even amnesia. And these effects can be worsened or even become lethal if mixed with enough alcohol. And both drugs were known to be fast-acting and almost untraceable, even in an autopsy. Additionally, Patrick was recovered on his back, which is extremely unusual for drowning cases, especially one of an individual with his height and body weight. Most drowning victims, they're found floating face down. To add to the mystery, lividity, which is rigor mortis, is the post-mortem discoloration due to the gravitation of blood into the dependent capillaries and veins. So basically, it's the pooling and settling of the blood that starts within 30 minutes after death. Fixed lividity occurs after 8 hours, usually 8 to 10. But fixed means that the blood has settled in one position for more than 8 hours and can no longer be significantly shifted by changing the position of the body. The autopsy report does not mention lividity. However, the autopsy photographs clearly present that any sign of lividity is absent from Patrick's back, which is where it should have been had he drowned and floated in the position he was found, on his back. It's no big secret that Detective Gannon was the sole believer on the entire force that this was anything but accidental. However, he's not one to give up so easily, so he kept pushing. Detective Gannon pressed for a lawman search, which we know today to be running the plates, and he asked for that to be conducted in order to determine the rest of the numbers on the suspicious vehicle's license plate. It's standard operating procedure for a suspected murder. But to his surprise, however, the department declined his request. Why? Because they insisted that the price tag of $1,200 was much too costly of an undertaking. So, side note, let me just ask you guys. We're talking about the potential murder. We're talking about a way to tie up loose ends in a case. Wouldn't either side really want to know who was in that car, what they saw, what their level of involvement was, if any? And was Patrick and finding out what happened to him not worth $1,200 to the police department? That just seems ludicrous to me. And I'm just kind of curious, what about running plates cost $1,200? Yeah, I mean, you tippy type on your keyboard and it pops up like magic, what costs $1,200 about that? I'm not really sure. Anyway, let's move on. Patrick was recovered with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.16. Now, human bodies naturally produce alcohol after death, but as part of decomposition, but considering that he was supposed to have been in the water for almost 2 months, about 50 days, his BAC should have increased by 0.04 due to post-mortem alcohol production. This means that the actual BAC upon entering the water was probably more like 0.12 or about 6 drinks tops. This is not that drunk for a young 6 foot tall, 195-pound young man. It is also not consistent with the kind of behavior that he was exhibiting in the bar's bathroom or outside the bar right after that. The stumbling, the fumbling, the repeated vomiting. If this were his true BAC upon leaving the bar, then something else had to make Patrick so sick that night. And given all this contradiction and mystery, Detective Gannon posited that Patrick's death was not an accidental drowning. He was stalked, abducted, held for an extended period of time, 50 days, murdered, and disposed of. After his death, he was then transported to Owl's Head and placed in the East River, whereon he was discovered and recovered within 24 hours of being dumped, which explains the absence of skin slippage on his feet. It explains the lack of, rigor mortis. It explains the lack of blood pooling where it should have. So if this is true, this theory of what really happened to Patrick, the murder and disposal would have only probably involved 3 to 4 days tops out of the total 50 that he was missing. So you have to ask, where was he the other 47 days? And no one has ever asked or answered that question. Nothing added up. And this is when Detective Kevin Gannon realized that he had a diabolical case on his hands, and he would never let go of it. Little did he know, within just a few years' time, he'd have many more cases just like it. In 2008, Gannon retired from the police force but continued his investigation into McNeil's death. After all, he had become close with the family and he had promised them that he would solve their son's murder. He assembled a team of professionals like himself, other retired police detectives, criminal psychologists, criminal educators, and he developed a partnership with Detective Anthony Duarte, and they opened up a PI firm that consisted of, like I said, retired detectives and criminal law professors, psychiatrists, psychologists, profilers. And together, this team has spent years investigating what we know today as the smiley face killer or killers theory. These investigators are responsible for popularizing the smiley face killer theory based significantly on the disappearance of Patrick McNeil as their foundation case, and whose case just kind of became the tip of this huge iceberg. Their official theory is this: that this smiley face killer may have been motivated to murder out of envy. They profile him as likely, quote, the opposite of the victims, not smart, someone not good in school, maybe doesn't have a job, and not popular, end quote. And they think he lashes out by drugging and murdering the men before dumping their bodies in the water, out of jealousy. Further, they suggest that the killer leaves a signature behind at the scenes. Perhaps they are signing their work or taunting the police. However, any other significance of the symbol remains unclear, and the symbol they're referring to is the smiley face graffiti. We'll talk more about that in a bit. There has also been the occasional appearance of the word Sinsinawa near the smiley faces and the death scenes, which they're debating what significance that might have to the cases. However, as the years have gone by and passed, the team has kind of evolved their theory and profile, and it now stands that they believe that these, quote, drownings are the work of an organized group of serial killers, maybe a gang or an organized dark web like network, and they dubbed them the smiley face killers. The team alleges that the serial killers target and murder college-aged men before dumping their remains into local waterways and painting smiley face symbols near where the bodies are discovered. Most of the young men disappeared after a night drinking with friends and were never heard from again. The serial killers reportedly form a highly sophisticated interstate network that uses the dark web for communication, and their supposed kill zone stretches from the East Coast cities to the Midwest college towns. Specifically, what caught my attention, side note by the way, was there have been allegations or assertions that there were some victims that went to the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, which is where A, I'm from, and B, my alma mater. So I found that very interesting. Anyway, continuing on. So you might be saying to yourself right now, okay, great. Where's the proof though? You might be thinking, I only heard you talk about one case, Mush. Didn't you say there was like up to 100 or more alleged victims? I did. The team started seeing these, quote, drowning clusters in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. And there are more recent cases as recent as 2024. And they have seen clusters more recently in Tennessee and now Texas. The most recent that I found is being associated with the theory of the smiley face killer is the case of Riley Strain, a Missouri student that was on a frat trip in Tennessee. And we'll talk about his case in a little bit. All the cases read pretty much the same at the core of them, though. They're young men, usually attractive, Caucasian, and smart. Almost without exception, these victims are white, college-age males who are described as athletic, good-looking, and academically successful. All of them are out at bars or parties, usually it's bars though, with friends or in a friend group even. All light drinkers, if they drink at all of them somehow, in most cases for unknown reasons, get separated from their friend group. All are suddenly struck ill and act very, very intoxicated, if not drugged, staggering, vomiting, confused, wandering, and falling. All have disappeared, and some even seconds just outside of CCTV views. I read one case and saw the footage where you see the kid walk in right in front of a CCTV camera, and he's tippy tapping on his phone. Unfortunately, they couldn't recover, zoom in and see that clear who he was talking to, what he was doing, but he's walking at night across the street in front of a CCTV camera and right off frame and right into a dark alley, and he didn't exit the alley. Like, he went into that alley and never came out, and yeah. Ugh. Anyway, sorry. All were found in rivers, but no sign of actual drowning, like no water in the lungs, no sediment in the lungs or in the stomach and the throat. No sign of literally actually drowning. All missing for several days, sometimes up to 2 months. But when they're found, the decomposition does not match the time and circumstances. And finally, smiley face graffiti has been found somewhere near the body discovery in almost every case. Nearly all of these alleged drowning victims were discovered in the frigid northern climate area during winter months, a ball shrinking climate scenario in which even the drunkest of frat dude bros might hesitate to wander near the water. But yet, there's no discernibly similar pattern of alcohol-related drownings in the much warmer southern states, even in the summertime. Until recently. And since some of the disappearances occurred on the same night and in different states, the detectives concluded that it must be a well-structured organization of killers that is responsible. And nearly all of the alleged, quote, smiley face murder cases are still classified as accidental drownings. Here are some details of just a few of the cases that are thought to be attributed to the smiley face killer or killers. This is kind of a timeline, if you will. So, everything started in 1997 with Patrick McNeil Jr., which I just told you about, so we won't rehash that. The next really notable case was in 2000. On January 1st, 2000, Northern Illinois University junior Brian Welsing was missing from Chicago, Illinois after a night of celebrating a Y2K party with his friends. The 21-year-old finance student rarely partied since he was dedicated to the university's soccer team. But he decided to have a few drinks for the new year. Welsing's friends said that he had only had 3 or 4 drinks, but by the end of the night he seemed very, very intoxicated. Welsing told his friends he wanted to call it a night and go back to the hotel where they were staying. One of Welsing's friends, named Nick Young, stayed behind. During the drive, Welsing started throwing up. His friend told him to get out of the car while he parked. Various witnesses outside the hotel saw Welsing vomiting in the street. His friends went up to their room and never saw Welsing again. When Young came back to the hotel around 4 a.m. and realized that Welsing was not in their room, he searched the area outside the hotel. He could not find Welsing and reported him missing around 1 p.m. After extensive searches, Welsing's body was found 77 days later on March 17th. It had been washed ashore on a beach in Gary, Indiana, 30 miles south of Chicago. Police said there were no signs of foul play and his death was ruled an undetermined drowning. Investigators believed he could have walked to the edge of Lake Michigan, a 5-minute walk from the hotel, and just fallen in. His blood alcohol concentrate was only 0.08%. Police have not said if a smiley face was present near the death site or not. Another case in 2002. On Halloween night, 21-year-old University of Minnesota student Chris Jenkins was last seen being kicked out of the Minneapolis bar. 4 months later, his body was found encased in ice in the Mississippi River, face up with his hands folded across his chest. Again, not a typical position for a drowning victim. Other details in this case lead investigators to think that he is also potentially a victim of the smiley face killers. Another case, in 2005, Todd Geib was 22 years old when he went missing. He went missing during the early hours of June 12, 2005, at a bonfire party in an orchard close to his home in Casnovia, Michigan. He was reported missing later that day by his mother, and a massive manhunt ensued. The night of his disappearance, Geib made several calls from his cell phone. One of them was to a friend who said she heard Geib say, quote, "I'm in a field," end quote, before the call dropped. Geib's body was found 3 weeks later in a lake that had previously been searched. His death was ruled an undetermined drowning as well. Oddly, Geib's head and shoulders were sticking out of the water as if he had gone for a swim. Geib's remains also had very little signs of decomposition, which would have been present if he had died the day he went missing, 22 days earlier. Alcohol and antidepressants were found in his toxicology screen, but it was reported that Geib was not suffering from any form of depression at the time, and these were not his prescriptions. A smiley face had been spray painted on a tree near where Geib's body was found, and a smiley face sticker was later placed on his gravestone. Need to hear more? Okay. In 2006, on September 29th, 2006, 21-year-old Lucas Homan vanished from La Crosse, Wisconsin. By the way, you guys, this La Crosse, Wisconsin place, so many cases that people theorize are linked to the smiley face killer. This was like one of his favorite hot spots, let me tell you, or their favorite hot spots, whatever. But anyway, the day of his disappearance, Homan was celebrating Oktoberfest with his friends, and after a night of, bar hopping, Homan headed home around 10 p.m. with a friend. Homan and his friend somehow got separated during their walk home, and his friend ended up in the ER detox with a head injury after being picked up by police. His friend then told investigators he could not remember anything that happened that night. When Homan did not arrive for a golf outing the next day, search dogs were employed to scour the downtown area where Homan was last seen alive. According to police reports, one dog later hit on an SUV owned by a local band member who had played at a show at the bar that Homan disappeared from. But the canine alert was deemed inconclusive for reasons unknown. Officials did not implicate the band member in Homan's death. The morning of October 2nd, Homan's body was found not far from the shore of the Mississippi River. His death was ruled an accidental drowning, and the autopsy report noted, quote, "acute alcohol intoxication was a major contributing factor," end quote. According to Detective Gannon and a co-worker Gilbertson, Homan had various injuries to his head, hands, and arms, and they theorized that a mark on his forehead may have been a footprint or boot print that was the result of Homan being held down. Homan was the 8th accidental drowning case in La Crosse in a 9-year period, and a smiley face was found spray painted near Homan's body when it was found. So, are you guys starting to see the pattern here? Because it was pretty clear to me. I've got more. Here's more. In 2008, Tommy Booth, 24, disappeared on January 19th, 2008 from a bar in Woodland, Pennsylvania. That night, he had been celebrating his friend's 21st birthday with a group of other friends. Surveillance footage captured Booth entering the bar where the celebration took place, but there is no evidence of him ever leaving. About 2 weeks after he went missing, Booth's body was found face down in a creek right behind the bar. His death was ruled a probable drowning, and there were no signs of trauma. The area had been searched repeatedly in the weeks before the body was discovered, but yet somehow no one saw his body. Literally, we're talking feet from the back door, like right there. And somehow, like, everybody missed it. According to former Detective Kevin Gannon and Dr. Lee Gilbertson, when Booth was found, his body was in full rigor mortis, which normally dissipates within 24 to 36 hours after death. This finding is inconsistent with the belief that Booth drowned the night he disappeared. Gannon and Gilbertson also noted that the body appeared to have been staged because there were 3 sticks that were strategically placed around his body, and there were shoe prints and drag marks in the soil around his body. A smiley face was painted on a wall of the bar under a deck. Yet another case in 2009, a Navy veteran, 24-year-old William Hurley, went missing after leaving a Bruins hockey game in Boston, Massachusetts. On October 8, 2009, Hurley went to the game with 2 friends. Halfway through the game, Hurley called his fiancée, Claire, and said that he wanted to leave. Hurley walked outside while Claire drove to the stadium to pick him up. When he called her, she was not far away. She was literally minutes away. However, when she arrived, he was nowhere in sight. When Claire called him to find out where he was, Claire said that he answered the phone and she heard him ask someone nearby where he was located. And that anonymous man said, quote, 99 Nashua Street. And Hurley then said his cell phone battery was going dead and warned Claire that he may not be able to reach her again and vice versa, that this might be, it. Do you got the address, Claire? Because my phone is going to die right now. She said she got the address and she drove there, but William was not anywhere in sight. He was just not there. So she called him a second time, but his cell phone seemed to be out of the battery because it went straight to voicemail repeatedly. Claire then said she drove around for about an hour looking for him and then returned home thinking that maybe William got another ride and maybe William would be home when she got there. But no, William wasn't there. She then reported William missing and various searches were conducted. 6 days after his disappearance, William Hurley's body was found in the Charles River, close to where he had asked Claire to pick him up. Investigators said there was no sign of foul play and that his death was ruled an undetermined drowning. Hurley's mother received a copy of the autopsy report and allowed a physician to analyze the report. She found out that her son had reportedly suffered blunt force trauma to the head, his eye socket, and his left leg. GHB was also found in his system along with a small amount of alcohol. Guess what? A smiley face was found painted near the river where his body was found. In 2014, on December 16th, Paul Kochu, a nurse at Allegheny General Hospital, disappeared after a night of drinking while watching Monday Night Football. He was last seen at 2:45 a.m. in a downtown Pittsburgh area near 10th Street Bridge. On March 20th, 2015, Kochu's body was found in the Ohio River near Wheeling, West Virginia. In this instance, authorities reported that his cause of death was, quote, an undetermined drowning, end quote. In 2015, 20-year-old Shane Montgomery, who had last been seen drinking with friends the day before Thanksgiving, disappeared, and his body wasn't found until right before Christmas. And these last 2 cases, again, had all the hallmarks and little check boxes, including smiley faces and such, basically cut and paste details of, generally speaking, of all the other associated cases. In 2017, Dakota James was 23 years old when he went missing from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. On January 25, 2017, around 11:30 p.m., James was walking back to his apartment after a night out drinking with friends and coworkers. He never made it home. The last known sighting of the university graduate student was caught on a surveillance camera in the downtown area. The footage captured James entering a dark alley. This is the kid I was telling you about. And that was the last time he was seen alive. The following morning, James did not show up for work. His boss informed his family, who filed a missing persons report 72 hours later. James' parents hired a private investigator who organized a massive citywide search, which led to the discovery of James' body in the Ohio River on March 6, 2017, 40 days after he had disappeared. The Pittsburgh police theorized that James fell into the river while crossing a bridge near the city center and drowned. They believe his body traveled the 10 miles and even went through a dam before it being discovered. James' body, however, had almost no visible damage, which is highly suspicious because if it had traveled down a heavily trafficked river with lots of boats and stuff and through a dam, you would think that there would be a mark on him somewhere. Not like just a mark, but like all the marks. But no, his body was pretty much in pristine condition for making that journey. Make that make sense. But again, it was still determined as an accidental drowning. So the smiley face was found spray painted on an underpass near where James' body was discovered. And finally, the most recent case that I could come across that was possibly linked to the smiley face killer theory is as recent as 2024. The young man's name is Riley Strain. So this University of Missouri student was in the city of Nashville, Tennessee, with Delta Chi fraternity members for their annual spring formal when he was kicked out of Luke Bridges' food and drink bar just after 9:30 p.m. Strain told his friends that he would meet them back at their hotel, but was nowhere to be seen when the group returned from their night out. His friends tried contacting him, but received no response, and they reported Strain as missing as they failed to locate him via his Snapchat location services. Surveillance footage collected by police from downtown Smoke and Vape Shop on Church Street showed Strain near the intersection of 2nd Avenue and Church Street. The seemingly intoxicated student was wearing a two-toned black and brown shirt, blue jeans, and took a tumble, then quickly got back up and continued down the street. Another camera caught near the intersection of Gay Street and 1st Avenue North just before 10 p.m. Has him taking large strides with his head down as he stumbled through the streets. The student had reportedly FaceTimed with his mother that evening, and she said nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all. Police previously shared footage showing Strain walking along the sidewalk past an officer who appeared to be inspecting a car with a smashed window. These footage clips can be found on Twitter, by the way. Homeless people living in an encampment on the nearby riverbank reported seeing a man answering Strain's description stumble into their camp. Quote, "We heard a commotion. We looked back up. He almost fell over. The last bush right there. That's what caught him." End quote. This is from an unidentified man who lives in the homeless camp and was speaking with reporters at WZTV. He was very, very, very intoxicated. "I never seen anybody stumble that hard before," the man said. "I yelled, 'Get up.' They said, 'He's just drunk, he's okay.'" The half-naked body of the 22-year-old student was hauled from the Cumberland River in Tennessee on Friday, 14 days after he vanished in Nashville on a night out. The initial police autopsy found no signs of foul play and no signs that he drowned either. The second autopsy performed on Riley Strain's body was confirmed that there was no water in his lungs, and The family has revealed they have increasing fears that he was dead when he entered the water. And as far as I know, this is still an ongoing case. There may be more news updates than what I found if you're interested, but yeah, this is like super recent and new, and very, very interesting. There were video footage clips of like in the background of news crews like reporting live and all that stuff. There was a picture of a woman in the background that was like filming the journalist being recorded for the news thing, and her phone case was a big smiley face. Interesting. Some junior, like amateur investigators, some girls from TikTok were making a TikTok about searching the area along the riverside and actually found his credit card and other belongings in a, kind of homeless encampment area on the riverbank. So, lots of stuff going on with that case in recent news. So, definitely check that out if you're interested. Now, you might be saying, okay, well, Mushy, you're telling us that there's arguments for like this serial killer network or one really, good at traveling serial killer that can like teleport to different places pretty quick. But, there must be people that oppose this theory. Otherwise, they wouldn't be calling it accidental drowning. And where's the FBI involvement? Like, why isn't this a bigger deal? Well, there is evidence for and against the smiley face murder theory. While Detective Gannon and Duarte turned up a wealth of disturbing details over the years, the fact remains that the theory of the smiley face killer or killers has been widely discredited. The police departments involved do not officially treat these deaths as part of a serial killer investigation. Law enforcement aside, though, the Minneapolis nonprofit Center for Homicide Research released a thorough report on the smiley face killer theory in 2010 that firmly debunked the entire theory. In addition to citing law enforcement and criminal justice experts who believe that there's no serial killer, the researchers investigated the cases themselves. They came up with a list of 18 reasons why they're sure there's no smiley face killer at all. So, not everyone is on board with this smiley face killer theory that Detective Gannon and his associates propose. In fact, in 2008, the FBI had stated that it had, quote, not developed any evidence to support links between these tragic deaths or any evidence substantiating the theory that these deaths are the work of a serial killer or killers, end quote. And the Center for Homicide Research released a report in 2012 debunking the smiley face killers theory. They stated that this theory was just an urban legend, citing the inconsistencies with the signature smiley face graffiti. Basically, their problem with the graffiti was that not every smiley face was the same color, not everyone was the same shape. Some had different features like horns. That it was very obvious that it was very different smiley faces and not just kind of like the same one repeated, if that makes sense. Another point that they make is that homicide by drowning is very rare. Furthermore, that method is mostly executed by parents who drown their own children. The report states that cold water can preserve bodies and prevent them from decaying. It also kind of points to some of the La Crosse, Wisconsin cases in the report and said that, the police had foot patrols stop over 50 intoxicated people from walking along the river at night, which could have potentially led to the falling in and what probably happened to most of those victims. It was just kind of a common occurrence that drunk people were found near the waterway. And they said that during the period of 1997 and 2010, 9 intoxicated college-age men have drowned in the area rivers. Out of however many college-age men, or live in the area in that decade-long span. So the report addresses our need for answers, stating, throughout history, society has always needed to produce monsters, often called folk devils, to help explain the unexplainable homicides and other forms of death that become mysteries. This information vacuum becomes a breeding ground of rumors, myths, legends, and all forms of monster making. So I had read over this report by the Center for Homicide Research, these 18 points that they came up with to support the assertion that there's no such thing as a smiley face killer. And I found some of their points interesting. So one of their first points was that they said that there is a problem of time order, that the smiley face graffiti must be proven to have been painted at or immediately after the time of the killing. And some of the photographs of the graffiti showed faded, worn out paint that looked to have been applied years earlier. And in other cases, the graffiti was found months afterward, and that there's no proof of when any of them were actually painted. And while determining the age of paint is forensically possible, it is technically imprecise, only narrowing it to the year of origin. And in many instances, no smiley faces were found near the crime scenes at all. And therefore, these findings of faces is most likely the result of happenstance, chance, or coincidence. Another point they made is that graffiti is omnipresent. Smiley faces were first invented around 1964 and have since spread everywhere. We even have emojis of a million different smiley faces on our phones in a billion different ways. Smileys have now become a universal symbol of happiness, and they exist anywhere from children's stickers to commercial logos. And one reason this graffiti is found everywhere is that the smiley face are among the easiest forms of graffiti to paint. This cheery graffiti is a cynical slap at the police by vandals. Because these vandals know that many cities work to document every instance of graffiti for later identification and prosecution, painting a smiley makes more work for the police, but it's quite simple to create. It's basically just taunting of the police by graffiti vandals. The third point they made is that one of the smiley faces must match exactly with another, and none of them do. There's no common paint stroke, height, width, curl, whirl, or dip. This makes it difficult to connect one incident to the next in the process of what investigators call linkage. Although linkage has been asserted by investigators, no credible linkage has been documented between any of the painted smiles. And to the contrary, investigators admit that paintings, the smiley faces, are all dissimilar and thereby illuminate their own biases. The claim that the uniqueness of each smiley is the result of multiple artisans is disingenuous and lacks any identifiable pattern. Basically, they're saying that they tried to rebut and explain themselves the way the investigators did, who support this theory, Gannon, that they're not the same because it's a network of killers. That it's different killers painting these faces. And they say that further, the investigators, meaning Gannon and his team, have begun distancing themselves from the smiley face implications, saying that the smiley faces are not all that important and only represent approximately 1/13 of the amount of linked symbols. A fourth point they made is that the word Sinsinawa, that they report is found half the time or more with around near the smiley face and the bodies, is just a red herring. They say it is commonly found throughout the Midwest and therefore is randomly occurring in graffiti found painted near several drowning sites. It's an Indian-based word that means rattlesnake or home of the young eagle. Like the smiley faces, Sinsinawa is a relatively common term, and it appears in over 15 different locations around the country, including Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, and Washington. And according to the CHR staff researchers, it occurs as the name of 3 streets, 1 river, and various commercial businesses, schools, and other assorted place names, including religious orders, one of which called the Sinsinawa Dominican Congregation of the Most Holy Rosary of the Order of Preachers. Say that one 10 times fast. Woo! Longest religious order name ever. It also has accrued several spellings, and there are multiple spellings listed. Another point they made is that no criteria has been established specifying the necessary distance that a smiley face must occur in proximity to the deceased body in order to be counted. In some cases, the word or the smiley or the word Sinsinawa is within close proximity, and with others, it is quite distant. Estimating where the body might have entered the water is simply that, an estimation. And even when based on experimental testing, there are too many consistently changing variables to ensure accuracy. Within the confines of a city, bridges, which most commonly evidence graffiti, can be located upstream of any body recovery location. In the Jenkins case, while using Google Earth, 7 bridges can be located within 1 mile upstream, as can hundreds of trees. Point number 6 was that there is no evidence of victim trauma. There is no sign on the vast majority of these recovered remains that they were, words are hard, the recipient of any trauma. As for Christopher Jenkins and his family, allegations that their son was driven around the city for hours while he was tortured, torture tends to leave signs of trauma. And there was no physical trauma identified in this case consistent with any kind of assault. And in one of the deaths, Patrick McNeil Jr., that's the case we talked at length about in the beginning, this evidence was present, but he was deceased prior to entering the water and did not drown. In point number 7, they say homicidal drowning is extremely rare, and they account for only 0.2% of all U.S. killings. Of the few cases that are known to exist, most involve parents drowning their own children, and on occasion a husband will drown his wife in a bathtub. Point number 8 that this organization came up with to discredit the smiley face killer theory is that the idea that water washes away all evidence is a myth. And to the contrary, water that is cold, as in many of these northern cases, it acts as a deterrent to decomposition, thereby preserving the wound patterns. Yes, water may wash blood off, but investigations show that much can be recovered from an immersed body, including lifting of latent fingerprints from the surface of the deceased's skin. From river drownings, investigators have shown that it is possible to obtain fiber evidence and blood evidence from the recovered remains, as was used to convict Wayne Williams in the Atlanta child murders. So, point number 9, they say that these drownings don't fit a serial killer's motives. The occurrence of serial homicide is a manifestation of a syndrome of behavior based on psychological motivations. One of the many varieties of serial homicide, these deaths do not show any of the related indicators that one would expect to find. These killings were not thrill killings because they required long, drawn-out killing process that included bondage, strangulation, sexual activity, and physical torture of a victim who was alive and aware of what is happening and able to feel pain. None of that is in the evidence of these victims, except possibly McNeil. To the contrary, it has been argued that these victims were quite unaware of their surroundings due to the alcohol intoxication and/or drug toxicity. Thrill killers are profiled as organized killers and therefore highly intelligent, in stark contrast to the proposed smiley face killer profile, who is, quote, not smart, someone not good in school, and maybe doesn't have a job, end quote. There was no financial motive, such as the collecting of Social Security checks or theft of money, nor do these deaths qualify as mercy killings. There is no known serial offender who has ever drowned a victim. Point number 10. Confessions by correctional inmates are unreliable. In at least one suspected homicidal drowning case, Jenkins' case, an inmate had confessed to his cellmate that he was responsible for the death. However, a claim by a prison convict of having killed one or several people is not credible on its own, they say. Point 11. The general environment of these disappearances are conducive to accidental drowning. All drownings appeared to have occurred at night and after dark in an area not far from bars and colleges. Inebriates who stagger away from bars are more likely to walk or stagger downhill because it's easier. Rivers are typically downhill from these drinking establishments and only a few blocks away. Many access points to the water lack barrier protection, such as walls or fences. Intoxicated people typically experience disorientation and impaired coordination, which makes them susceptible to falling. This, in combination with a lack of barriers, is a recipe for accidental drowning. Point 12. The supposition that only males are drowning does not necessarily support a serial killer theory. Males are more likely than females to die or be hospitalized from drowning. Alcohol is risky behavior and has been shown to be a major factor in drowning cases, and males are more likely to engage in risky behaviors, even when not drinking. It's also probable that females are dying from intoxication in other ways, such as falling from a river bluff or dying in a dormitory room from acute alcohol intoxication. Point 13. The La Crosse, Wisconsin Foot Patrols and police have stopped over 50 intoxicated persons near watering holes and water locations like rivers and lakes. So there's a high volume, and it's with the high volume of people that are intoxicated walking by water away from a bar, it's likely to happen that there are going to be a few drownings. Is essentially what the point they're making. And number 14, the process by which intoxicated men accidentally fall into a river is already well known and well documented. The La Crosse Police Department issued a report detailing the circumstances of at least 20 imminent drowning victims who have survived using first-hand accounts. Causes included dares, suicide attempts, and most commonly accidents. Eyewitnesses were present for several of these instances. Most all victims were intoxicated at the time of the near drowning. Intoxicated victims can and do fall in a river. Contrary to popular belief, accidental near drownings are fairly common, though not typically well documented. Foot slip marks have been documented as well on riverbanks. Point 15. Many of these drowning cases are likely to have involved aspects of auto-assassination. Auto-assassination is not suicide per se, but a style of living with reckless disregard for one's own life. Responsible drinking does not involve drinking to the point of intoxication. Many of these drowning victims appear to be drinking to the point of total inebriation. In some instances, these deaths actually may be suicides. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in people aged 15 to 24. Binge drinking is a strong predictor of actual attempts, and 25% of all self-unalivings are immediately preceded by alcohol use. Point number 16. Malicious drugging of victims is unsupportable by evidence. One claim being made is that drowning victims were drugged by the offenders prior to their abduction to obtain control over the victim, and that it was a drug not detectable by autopsy. This problematic claim is not falsifiable unless investigators were purposefully looking for a specific toxin. GHB and other substances do not stay in the body very long, and while some of those drowning victims do have evidence of GHB present, there is no evidence to support that the drugging was malicious. Instead, this is simply an untested and untestable position. 17. Presence of GHB in the victim's body does not indicate whether these victims were maliciously drugged or knowingly administered it to themselves. In some cases, GHB is detected alongside high levels of alcohol in the deceased. GHB is a naturally produced chemical in the human body. Though typically produced in small amounts, the decomposition process can release additional GHB into the system. and it seems less relevant since alcohol alone can cause similar effects to those associated with GHB, such as the loss of muscle coordination, dizziness, and etc. And finally, their last point was the drowning of college students is not limited by region, but by climate. It happens in the UK and Canada as well. States such as Arizona, Utah, and Nevada all lack cases due to their absence of water and the desert climate. The deaths in other countries are never linked by nefarious activity, just the accidental behavior of inexperienced and intoxicated youths. So that's what the criminal, I don't even know what to call them, my research group had to say. And they're, I guess basically attacking the smiley face serial killer claim and assertion. I personally felt that was like really, they were really just being buttheads. You can tell by the way they word things. And I mean, they're just like basically a lot of points saying, well, it can't be this because we say so, or it can't be this because it would be rare, it would be uncommon. Well, this is a rare and uncommon thing, and it's reports like that and mindsets like that and unwillingness to dive in and investigate, in my opinion, that is leading to, if it is a killer or killers, they're getting away with it so many times for so long because nobody is taking it seriously. And why not? I can't understand why not. It's a waste of resources to find out why a human life ended? And so many human lives. I don't understand. But anyway, as if this all weren't convincing enough, the FBI has repeatedly reported that they do not find evidence of a serial killer or killers linked to these cases. However, in more recent years, there has been the occasional agent that concedes to the theory is valid and plausible. Whew. Well, guys, we made it. We made it through. That was a lot, wasn't it? Um, you, I can't wait to hear what you guys think about this. Have you heard of this before? What do you think? Did you know all these details? Have you never heard of this before? Have you been following these cases? Like, what's up? So, like, is a shadowy but organized gang of serial killers responsible for murdering somewhere between 40 and 100 or more drunken white college-age males and then dumping their bodies in waterways to wash away physical evidence or for some other reason? And are these demented and demonic bastards taunting police by drawing smiley faces near where they send the bodies to their watery graves? Should we, as Americans generally, but more specifically the drunken white college-age males among us, be very, very afraid? Or is the smiley face killer's theory simply some implausible, grandiose delusion concocted by a pair of attention-starved former police detectives who've woven a fairy tale around what most experts insist is a string of accidental and unrelated drownings? In other words, is this theory for real or just really dumb? Either way, it is a stubborn, persistent theory. It won't die, no matter how many people try to kill it. All right, you guys, that's it for today's Tales from the Cr'Wip't. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I will also include all my sources cited in the description box. So, yeah, that's it. And until next week, stay safe.